Hello everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and today we are going to begin our next big project. We are going to create a spooky forest game. So in order to create a spooky forest game, well, we need a spooky forest. So let's go ahead and start building that game. I'm going to create a brand new project here in Godot 4.3, and I will call this Spooky Game. We're going to use Forward Plus because we want 3D graphics. This is a 3D game. And I'm going to click Create It and Edit. All right. So what we now have is a blank canvas. We have a blank area. We need to create our environment here. Let's start with a 3D node, right? So we want a 3D node here. To start dumping stuff into. Let's rename this to World. Okay, and let's save this scene. Okay, perfect. Next, we actually need a model that will make up the world that our character is going to be running around in. Godot does not have the ability for us to create 3D models that are complex in shape. So what we need is basically a model that was built in another program like Blender or something like that. So I've given you a folder with a series of models in it. And these models are, there are all kinds of models in here. The one that we care about is the terrain for right now. Later on, we're going to use the rock and the tree models later on in this video. But for right now, we just want to drag this models folder into our Godot project so that we have access to those models. We can use them. Blender 3.0 is required to import .blend files. So I don't have Blender installed on my computer, so I'm not going to be able to find the Blender application. You probably do, so you can click Browse and then find where Blender is installed on your computer, but it's not technically necessary. The reason why we would want to use this is if we wanted to go in and modify our models in Blender. We can just open it straight up from Godot. Right now, I'm not really that worried about it, so I'm just going to click Disable.blend import and save and restart. All right, now notice I have a new folder down here called Models. This folder has all of the models that we're going to use for this project. We have a pedestal, and it has a material. We have a rock, and it has a material. We have a tree, and it has a bunch of materials that we're using for this tree. We also have grass.jpg, which is a texture. We have terrain material, which we're going to use in a second. But we have this terrain object. This is what makes up our terrain. So let's go ahead and just drag that out into the scene. So we have this nice pre-built terrain. Now before we move on, I want to set this at 0, 0. So let's go to our transform properties and let's reset our position. There we go. Okay. Now, I don't want this terrain just by itself. I don't want it to be a child of the world node. I actually want it to be a child of something called a static node. The reason for that is because at some point later on, we might actually program this whole world environment to do things, and we'd want a node attached to it for that. So let's do, or better said, we'd want it attached to a static body 3D node in order for us to do that properly. So I'm going to search for static body 3D and click Create. I'm going to make my terrain a child of our static body 3D. And let's rename this to terrain, I don't know, terrain world. Sure. All right, so we have our terrain here. It's very boring looking. Okay, so we need to make it look a whole lot better. Here's the best way to do that. We can use a pre-built model. So just drag the terrain material.tres out into the world And now we have a grass-like texture that has been applied to the model. Perfect. Now the other thing is, if we are a player and we're standing on the ground here and we're looking around, notice that it's just one line of mountains and then we get the sky. We kind of want to make that a little bit more interesting. Okay, so here's a fun trick that we can use to jazz it up a little bit. Oh, first, actually, let's add a collider so that this message can go away. Adding a collider to a 3D model is actually pretty easy. Because the model is made up of something called a mesh, we can actually just click on this mesh button up here, click Create Collision Shape, make sure we have it set to sibling, and we have it set to tri-mesh, and click Create, and it will create a collider for us. Beautiful. All right, so we have our collider. Now let's add some variation to the level. I'm going to take this terrain here, right click, and I'm going to duplicate. Where is duplicate? There it is. And I'm going to rotate that duplication. That looks about good. And I'm going to scale it up. I'm going to use a scale tool here to scale it. And I'll make it a little bit higher too. And what that's done is now if we were to come down in here, now there's like some more variation. We can actually scale it a little bit more. And let's bring it down just a little bit so that there's no clipping on the floor here. So just bring it down just a little bit. There we go. Perfect. So now the illusion looks nice. Perfect. Okay, cool. All right, so that is our, and let's scale it a little bit more on this side, and we'll bring that in a little bit. I'm just trying to make it look a little bit more visually interesting, maybe rotate a little bit more. Sure, looks fine to me. Okay, so there's some depth there now. Okay, now we want to apply something called an environment. Notice that up here, these two buttons are turned on by default. This one simulates sunlight, this one simulates an environment. If we turn those two off, this is what our game looks like, okay? Now, you're probably thinking, oh, that's perfect for a spooky game. Not really. We want there to be some light. We want there to be something for our player to actually see, okay? So we need a light and we need an environment. So I'm going to, as a child of the world, I'm going to add a new node, and I'm going to make this a directional light 3D. Okay. Now this directional light, the only thing that matters is which direction the light is facing. Okay. I'm going to bring it up just so we can see the tool, or yeah, we can see this thing a little bit more. So I'll bring it up. Notice that this arrow is pointing to the right, which means the only direction that the light is traveling is in that direction. So if we rotate this, we can rotate it down a little bit. There we go. And we get some decent shadows. We get some cool looking light. Now, if I move this up or down, it's not going to matter because it's only simulating the sunlight coming from a certain direction. Okay? All right. And we can change a bunch of stuff about this. So we can come in here and we can turn on shadows, or we can make our shadows different. We can change the color of our light, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the light just a little bit bluer, just so it gives that like nighttime feel, right? Because this is a spooky game. So I'm going to make it nice blue light. That helps it with the nighttime aspect. And we can change the color of the light anytime we want. Shadows, let's enable shadows. Now we can do all kinds of things to these shadows. We can crank it up. We can change the bias on the shadows. There's all kinds of stuff we can do. And I'll let you guys play around with that. I think this looks pretty nice for me. The other thing we want to do is we want to turn on an environment. So I'm going to select my world node again, add a child node, and choose world environment. Now, a world environment lets you do all kinds of cool stuff, but the one thing that we're really focused on is creating a new environment. So if we click in here and click new environment, then we have all of these options that we can use. We can change the background of our sky. We can change it from a clear color to a sky. We can change it to a custom color, which I think I'm going to make mine just like a darker blue. It'd be better if we have, I'll see if I can find a skybox that actually has stars in it. That would be fantastic, because I'm not seeing, maybe, yeah. Oh, it's because we have an empty sky, that's why. New sky. Let's see, sky material. Let's do a new procedural sky material. We can change the top color and the horizon ground. Let's make the top color a little bit darker. Okay, and let's make the horizon color a little bit darker as well. Okay, I like that. I like that. I like that. Now there's going to be a sun in there somewhere. There we go. And it's a nice blue sun, so it looks like the moon. That's cool. So maybe it's just a starless night. Okay, that looks pretty cool. I like that. I would have rather had some stars, but I didn't think about it before I started gathering assets for this project. So if you find one that you really like, you can use, instead of procedural, you can use a physical sky material, and then you can dump that material in as your sky. But that's okay. Let's see. Yeah, that's about it for sky. We can also create some ambient light if we wanted to. I'm not going to mess with that. The one thing I really want to do is fog. I want to enable fog. Now, we don't want a Silent Hill situation here where it's so foggy you can barely see. But just the basic fog that we just turned on, it's kind of good. I like that. Let's use depth on the mode so that we get a little bit more 3D depth with the fog. And I'm noticing that my fog is kind of dominating my sky a little bit. So we can change the sun scatter so that our sun kind of peeks through the sky, or peeks through the fog a little bit. We can change the light energy, make it a little bit less. Let's reset that. We can change the fog color so it's a bit darker if we really want to. Nah, let's reset that. Let's see. Change the density if we wanted to. The sky effect, that's what I wanted to find. I don't want the fog to affect the sky too much. We can change the height of the fog, the height density. We can change all kinds of stuff. Volumetric fog. Ooh, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I wanted. Volumetric fog. So now we have that nice blue sky, but we still have the fog as well. Cool. And all this stuff you can play with. I'm not going to play around with it too much because I want to get on to using our other models. All right. So that's it for environment and directional light. Now the last thing I want to show you is how to use these other models so that we can actually have something other than just a flat surface to run around on. So down here we have tree, rock, and pedestal. Pedestal we're not going to worry about until we start programming the actual game. Let's just talk about the trees real quick. If you open up the tree folder, there's all of this stuff in here that we can use. What we're looking for is the tree object mesh. When we bring that in, notice that it's way too big. Way too big. So we need to scale that down a lot. Let's go to our transform, and on the scale, type 0.01, Enter, and it will scale it nice. It'll scale it down nice and small. Okay. Now, it's not the best looking tree in the world, but it's good enough for our spooky game. Okay. Now, before we start making copies of this thing, we want to make sure it has a collision. Oh, actually, no. I think it has a collision shape already. Let's take a look at the tree scene. Yep, it does. So notice that the tree already has a collision shape, which means maybe I need to bring in the tree scene itself. Let's do that. Let's instantiate the tree scene instead of bringing in the tree object. So let's do that. Let's do tree, open. Oh, and it's the perfect size. Okay, good. Yeah, we should have done that from the beginning. So ignore bringing in the object. Let's just instantiate scenes because it'll have its collider and everything else on it. Perfect. Now what we can do is we can Control D to duplicate, and we can move. And we can put this tree wherever we want. We can rotate it so that it's not facing the same direction. And we can do that a bunch. And actually, I think this is just a little bit too big. Let's scale this down half. Yeah, that's much better. And we'll do the same thing here. Scale it down 0.5. Perfect. Yeah, I don't want the trees to be too big. But what we can do is we can actually scale some of them up on the Y just to make it just a little bit taller. So there's a variation in height. 0.7 is a bit too much. Okay. Perfect. And now let's just manually start grabbing these trees and duplicating them and adding them into our scene. So just kind of move them where you want them to go and create a dense forest. Okay. And you can vary the size of them. You can rotate them, all kinds of stuff. All right. One thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to create a new 3D node. I'm going to call it trees. I'm going to make my trees a child of that node. That way, I can hide my trees in my menu whenever I don't need to see them. Perfect. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to call it rocks. Okay, and we'll do the same thing here. Let's instantiate a new rock, open, and whoa, what happened here? So, for some reason, this rock, let me zoom, come on. For some reason, this rock is, the model's origin is off from where the rock is. So we need to move it down. I tried to fix it in Blender, but I wasn't able to get it fixed. So we'll just move it down. Let me just fly over there. Okay. So we'll notice that our rock is there. And it's kind of sticking up out of the ground. Now, with the rocks, you can vary their size, just like with the trees. It's going to be very annoying to move this thing around just because of the origin being off. But with a little bit of finagling, you can do it. We can rotate it around. We can change its size. Let's scale it down to, I don't know, let's say 3. Oh, yeah. When scaling it down, it's going to scale the whole thing, which means we got to bring this back up. There we go. Yeah, that's going to be annoying. If you can figure out a way to fix that, let me know. But I think it's a Blender thing, and I wasn't able to fix it in Blender. So we'll just have to deal with a poorly rendered or a poorly built model. But with the rock, we can do the same thing. We duplicate, move it around. We can scale it up so it's bigger. We can rotate it. Okay. All right. So using those tools, using the trees and the rocks, go ahead and create a fun environment for your character to run around in. The denser the better, the more trees the better. Try to create some paths though for your character to follow. Don't just randomly put trees everywhere. Some paths would be really nice. So that way you can, oh, what's the error here? Non-uniform scale. Okay, fine. Whatever. Follow some, create some paths for your character to follow, but don't make it super obvious. All right, I'm going to let you guys play around with that, make the cool environment that we're going to build for this game. Don't forget to save all of your work so that you don't lose it, and I will see you next time.